go. All right, everyone, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to one of our fabulous Arizona State doctoral students, Bridget Liddell, who is going to introduce our next speaker.
All right, Dr. Rahul Mitra worked in the news, broadcast, and public relations fields in India for 3.5 years before earning his PhD in communication at Purdue University, and is now an associate professor at Wayne State University. Mitra's experience with corporate and nonprofit work cultures comes from his prior work experience, community engagement, research projects, and hosting the website OrgCom in the News. He has facilitated and organized workshops and public talks on career preparation and impression management for both academic and non-academic careers. Mitra has an active Twitter profile where he actively engages with hashtag academic Twitter and hashtag alt-ac networks. Dr. Mitra.
Thanks, Bridget. And thank you to Sarah and the entire team for facilitating this amazing seminar series. I'm privileged to be the last person to finish up this amazing series, so I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation, which is honestly, I think, a conversation that I think we in the communication discipline should really have been having a long time ago. In so many respects, we are a little behind some of the other disciplines regarding alternative academic careers. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm just going to share my screen because I do have slides, but my slides are horrible. They basically, oh, there you go. As you can see, they're all full of texts. So yeah. But they're really primarily more to help me sort of make sense of the narrative rather than ramble on. So indulge me for that, please. So my agenda for this evening is a little more about sort of tying the threads together. So for me, I want to start by explaining a little bit about my positionality and where I sort of enter this issue and why I'm particularly interested and excited about this conversation. And then I want to start by making sense of some of the amazing conversations that we've actually had since last week and the career stories that people have shared. And I'm really going to be focusing a little bit more on the reflection and the planning part and what can people actually do based on some of the stories that they have heard. And then I'm going to also suggest a few really wonderful available resources that primarily students can really start pursuing and keeping track of even at this early time. And then at the same time, it would be amiss not at all be in the critical mode of inquiry that we were talking about earlier if we also didn't really grapple with some real talk or the understanding that this is not, unfortunately, going to be a very easy issue for a lot of PhD students unless a lot of time and energy and reflection and thinking really goes into this effort. Academia has some constraints and possibilities as well as other industrial sectors do. And so really grappling with this is important. So where do I come in over here? So I actually haven't walked the walk in the sense that I do not have a PhD advisee who is in an alternative academic career, although a couple of my PhD advisees are actively exploring that path as well. And nor have I been in an alternative academic job per se. However, I've been really following the conversations on Twitter and off Twitter as well about the different kinds of paths that are being followed across different disciplines. And I think, so I'm really going to be primarily sharing some of those key observations and experiences of other people. I've also had a really general research interest in career studies and the meaningfulness of work in different contexts. And it's wonderful that this webinar series is sponsored by NCA's Advancing the Discipline Grant, because back in 2013 or 12, Patrice Buzzanel and I also used funding from the same grant to start a research project where we were looking at communication graduate students' sense-making of work and their eventual career. And that project was, the data from that project was in cases really uplifting. And sometimes it was incredibly sad. And I was a graduate student at that point. Patrice was a PI for that grant. So as a graduate student, learning about some of these really horrible, untold stories was just devastating and really difficult to hear and try to sort of make sense of. So I think really that experience has been really formative for me in terms of really being interested in this issue of, what are we doing about communication graduate students' careers. I've also had the opportunity to be involved in some cross-university and interdisciplinary initiatives at Wayne State that really focus on offering graduate students timely career advice and professional development, connecting them to community and local organizations where alternative job prospects also frequently arise. And primarily through these partnerships and collaborations, I've just been really witness to some of the institutional work that other fields like history, for instance, engineering, English, and really a lot of disciplines in both the literary side as well as the social side as well as the natural and engineering side have really been on this front. And then, of course, the Twitter part. But the Twitter part, I don't want to entirely dismiss either, because while I think, the Twitter networks, academic Twitter, PhD Twitter, and Altac are really amazing at times because of the support that they provide, just the informational resources that also they provide. It is important to recognize that just as with all social media, there's often a fair amount of misinformation. And worse in some cases, negative contagion is real. So you got to take the social media thing again with a pinch of salt, more than a pinch of salt, to put it honestly. So I'm going to start with the real talk part actually first, and because I want to get the depressing part out of the way early, so we can really focus a little bit on more on the positive and the useful things that people can do. So first of all, it's important to understand the historical trend of academic jobs, both tenure track as well as lecturer positions, not only in the broader discipline, but also in your sub-discipline. And the reason I say that is because compared to especially some of the other humanities and social science disciplines, historically communication itself has not been that bad until someone decided to come into town last year with the pandemic. So it is important to recognize that the negative contagion sometimes that we do hear a lot about on Twitter, especially about lack of jobs in communication, at least prior to COVID, might not be entirely founded. At the same time, recognizing that different subdisciplines also have different performances becomes really important. So basically key takeaway is pay attention to the NCAA data that they release pretty much every year about the academic job market. The other part that I really encourage everyone to grapple with is, why do you join a PhD program to begin with? My PhD advisees will tell you that before I actually agree to serve as anyone's PhD advisee, I give them sort of like this third degree, like, why do you want to do a PhD? What would you do with this degree? Why would you want to, put yourself through at least 4 years of research and publication that you could not do elsewhere? And I think it's a really important question for people to articulate for themselves. This is not an answer that your advisor can give you. It is an answer that you really have to come to for yourself. And over time, if those factors are eroding or they're contributing to a potential reappraisal of that decision, then that's totally fine. It's part of the process, but it is something to keep track of and keep note of, rather than allow yourself to be guilted about it by anyone else. I'm also going to say that, unfortunately, a PhD degree is still often seen as a bit of an oddity in corporate America, especially for recruiters. It's an expensive and, frankly, an esoteric degree. There's not enough, in many cases, a distinction between what the MA can do and what the PhD can do in some disciplines, and so we kind of basically have to be a little wary of the expectation that PhD terminal degree is going to be automatically welcomed waiting arms in industry. That might happen in research fields. It might happen like research jobs like Dana was talking about the other day. It might happen in some government jobs like the CDC, for instance. But really, if you're talking about the bulk of corporate jobs, it is important to recognize that the PhD is still a little wishy-washy. They have a little bit of trouble understanding what the PhD is and how it can apply to their business, which basically means that you, as the job applicant, have to do that extra framing work to show why your work, why your expertise is really relevant to that position and that company. The traditional academic outputs of journal publications, conference presentations, unfortunately, have little to no standing there. What also sort of queers the pitch a little bit is that a lot of our traditional academic support networks don't really apply, because at least in the U.S., my understanding and my has really been that very few professors really have amassed that kind of relevant experience or expertise working for long standing stints in industry, and thus might be able to give you pertinent advice for a non-academic career, which means that you sort of have to start cultivating alternative and newer organizational and institutional networks. If the traditional ones, like the advisor, is a little shaky at this point, at least for informational advice. And finally, there is, of course, the possibility that, even if your department is totally on board with your decision to work in a non-academic setting, as a lot of departments increasingly are, and your PhD advisor has also given you her or his blessings, In the broader field, there is the possibility that it might be viewed hostilely, especially by certain of the gatekeeper class. So you kind of need to take that into account as well for your decision making. Okay, we're done with the depressing stuff now. So what do we do? So I talked about reflection and planning, and there are a few things to really focus on. And I'm going to address these primarily in terms of a few questions that you might have had when just considering all of the wonderful presentations and stories that you've actually heard so far. Well, the first one is, what do I do? It's wonderful to hear the stuff that Dr. Martin has done or Dr. Baim has done, but can I really accomplish all that? And it's basically a form of imposter syndrome, which is perfectly natural, honestly, to start having pangs about. The second question you might be thinking about is, who do I talk to do this? When do I start talking to people and actually doing this stuff? How do I present myself and my work? Wait, does this mean that I want to leave academia? And that can be an unsettling thought for some of you who might not have quite grappled or even said that aloud, right? Does even thinking about a non-academic job mean that you want to leave academia? And if people suspect that to be the case, do your professors hate you now? And I guess a question for the faculty, how do I help my students do all of this, on top of everything else? So I'll give you a few answers. What do I do? Honestly, there are just so many paths and so many different kinds of organizations. Do whatever seems right for your life circumstances. The big, bold gestures, the working at the large organizations may not be possible for a lot of people in life circumstances which would not make them feasible or tangible. Similarly, maybe starting your own company right off the bat might not actually quite work out, but you can at least start making baby steps towards that. So do whatever seems right for your life circumstances. The other thing I want to also point out is often when we talk about alt-ac, I think we tend to focus on industry. And as Dr. Martin just pointed out, higher education actually employs the largest number of PhDs in non-academic job settings. So you could actually end up working for a university, but not in an academic job. Similarly, you could be working for a nonprofit, for the government. And so it is important to recognize that there is a huge array of potential job opportunities beyond just corporations. And so, for those of you who are concerned about, the critical subjectivities being lost, take heart from that. Who do I talk to? I'm going to talk about this in the next slide. Track and follow up on available resources. When do I start? You should have started yesterday. If you think that this is a topic that really speaks to you, you should have started yesterday. And the good news is all of you did, because you attended the webinars prior to this one, which is awesome. I guess the point I'm trying to make with that seemingly facetious response is that the sooner you get cracking, the better it will be for you. Because you do not want to be in your, it is really hard to be doing all of this and dissertating and potentially teaching classes at the same time. So starting early, as early as possible, will be to your benefit. How do I present myself strategically? Know your audience, rule of communication 101. So use the platforms and the language that your intended audience consumes. I'll mention a few of these in the next one. And so, yeah, the one about Whether this means you want to leave academia, no, right? Because you could still end up working for a university. And no, your professors probably don't hate you. But you should speak honestly and early with them. And I would really suggest at least, your people who you really get along well with, it's a good idea to involve them in this process of thinking. And the one for the faculty, honestly, I don't know. It's really hard for all of us with everything else that's going on and Zoom University. But all we can do at this point is just track and follow up on some of the available resources. So what are some of these available resources? So yeah, okay, this slide, my animation is kind of screwed up, so apologies for that. But I sort of try to divide them under two categories. The crucial agenda items are the things that you really should do, or you should start moving on these agenda items as soon as possible. And then the crucial people in the networks, these are the folks that you've really got to keep in mind and start sort of attending the same gatherings online or offline that they do. So the first one for the agenda item is developing a strategic online presence. Really, really crucial. I mean, and this is again something that several of the other speakers have also talked about. This could be anything really. It could be a social media account. It could be Twitter. If you see yourself as a public intellectual, that's one thing. If you see yourself as a problem solver, that's another. But end of the matter, the basic thing is you need a strategic online presence to showcase your brand. Understand that the various job duties and other requirements of the kind of position or the industry that you're targeting. And basically the goal, I guess, is not to leap headfirst into another industry or sector with rose-tinted glasses if you're already, if the reason that you are moving away from academia is because you're fed up of the grind or something else entirely, you want to be careful that you are avoiding the same issues with the sector or the position that you do end up applying for. So again, doing due diligence on the job duties, but also, temperamental requirements, emotional labor requirements. What do people go through on the job? How do they cope? That's really, really important as well. The third part is probably the most, technical, but it's really, really important to keep track of the skill sets that are in demand at these jobs, and obtain certification if you can, wherever possible. So for instance, right now, Python, Python has been big for at least a couple of years. Agile project management was really big, I think, last year. It's starting to wane right now. GIS mapping, geographic information systems mapping on ArcGIS is a tool that just seems to, everyone seems to just want it across different sectors and industries. I've been a part of at least 3 different community-based collaboratives that when we ask them, well, what kind of tools and skill sets do you want PhD students or graduate students who are going to be working with you in the community to have, they all mention ArcGIS and they all mention Python. So coding and mapping apparently are really, really crucial. Procure the software and the hardware that you will need for this. This stuff is not always free. ArcGIS, for instance, is definitely not free. So you might have to go to the parent websites, or you could find electronic clearinghouses of sorts, like the Captera site or the Atlassian site, which actually has some really great tools for maybe say project management or any other kind of skill that you can learn and showcase on your resume. Talking about your resume, and I'm glad Nicole talked about this as well, you've got to revise your CV or your resume to highlight your skills and your experiences, not the research publications or presentations. So skills and experiences, what does that mean? That means skill at grant writing, right? And you've applied for so many grants and you didn't get one, but you got this other one. That's wonderful. Project management, anytime you're working on a research project, that is project management 101. So talk about your experience building and working with the team. Again, skills with particular software, SPSS, Atlas, if you're using R these days, that's fine too. So basically the goal is in your new resume to reimagine your work, not necessarily, not anymore in terms of just the publications that you produce, but really according to the so what question, right? What is the practical implication of your trajectory of work, of your research that you've been doing over the past few years? What is this going to result in? And in fact, I've actually heard a few people tell me that in your CV, they would actually prefer to see people not lead with a PhD. They don't say bury it, but they say it doesn't have to be maybe like the first thing on your resume, like right after your name. And their reasoning has been that the PhD is important, but it's only one part of your totality. I don't have numbers or stats on whether that's really widespread or maybe it's just these few people who have told me that, but I did want to share that with you. The last thing that is really important is honestly time management. And again, I know we're all going through a crazy time right now. Well, even prior to COVID, graduate school was never easy. And in a way, sometimes it can be hard pursuing an alternative academic career, because sometimes it can feel like you are doing double the amount of work, especially if the expectations, the academic expectations of your work don't come down. So given that situation, it is really important to be kind to yourself and set specific time, maybe allotments, that you can actually pursue these agenda items, that you don't ignore maybe learning a new skill, right? That's really important, that you don't ignore procuring the software or redesigning your CV. So, make time. So on the other side, I know I'm talking about making time. I'm a little over time, so I'm going to dash through. Crucial people and networks, family and friends. One of our PhD students, not an advisee of mine, recently got an amazing job at Henry Ford, and it's tailor-made for him. So Henry Ford is the hospital arm so it's not the motor company, and it's tailor-made for his personality, his skill sets, and interestingly enough, the opportunity really arose as most, again, non-academic job opportunities do, right? A friend of a friend or an uncle or something like that. And they looked at his resume, he was perfect, and he got the job. Alumni, really, really important, especially from your programs. So they can actually help you with giving you feedback for your application material, help you with the design and the branding of your cover letter and things like that. So your alumni from your program would be really wonderful. So faculty, cultivate your relationships with alumni who are in all-type jobs. Your university's graduate school, Dean of Student Affairs and Career Services will be great. They will probably have all sorts of resume writing, career service, resume writing workshops. The graduate school at Wayne State, for instance, has all sorts of professional development sessions. For example, creating your online presence and what you can do about that. So definitely keep close tabs with these different groups. Other departments or colleges at your university, or even student groups, again, that offer specialized courses or even modules and key skills. So for example, you might actually find a really cool module on GSI at the geography or the geology department, or the anthropology department. So it's a really good idea to keep track of where you can pick up some of these key skills for the cheapest price possible. That's really important. Interdisciplinary programs and conferences in your university are also really important because they really help you, again, make those connections for job connections. So if you have maybe, for instance, the dogs. If you have centers for research on big data, for instance, or environmental sustainability, or whatever is the big topic that you really see yourself working in, it's definitely a good idea to follow up with them, not only for research connections, but really potentially for career prospects as well. Finally, practitioner conferences on the topic or interest area. I think someone mentioned that. I think Heather mentioned that the other day. And then social networking sites like LinkedIn and YouTube. YouTube, it's not only about how to do silly video things. It's also got how-to videos on really important skill sets. So you can teach yourself some really important skills and tasks on YouTube. And LinkedIn, of course, the communities and the groups on LinkedIn are really, really important gatekeeper communities for these positions. Job application sites like Monster have really upped their game a lot, especially because they've been providing a lot of great feedback on writing tailored cover letters and resumes. So that's why I've included that in this list. And finally, coaches and consultancy services that are geared towards the PhD students specifically who wants to make this shift. These are not free though. There is a charge. I think a few universities, I think ASU actually has a tie-up with Beyond the Professoriate for a free version available for graduate students, but not a lot of universities have done this. But there are actually, the good news is that there are a plethora of really wonderful options here for coaches and consulting services. So some key thoughts: do not be ashamed or allow yourself to feel stigmatized for considering a job outside academia. But at the same time, it's important to have a realistic understanding of the pros and the cons. They might align with your life in general. Communication PhD students, it's really the same thing with undergraduate students. We tell our undergraduate students, you're qualified to apply for all of these wonderful jobs because communication is central to pretty much everything. And the same logic sort of applies for PhD students applying for all type jobs, because you do get considered for all of these different positions. But in order to make that case effectively, you do need to start working early and thinking in terms of reflecting and planning and moving early on. And then lastly, again, make your academic advisor your partner. Hopefully your advisor is on your side. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mitra. That was really fantastic. I've been watching the chat and also listening, and we have a lot of resources in the chat and questions and comments and acknowledgments. And I will synthesize some of that, but y'all, you are welcome to keep posting questions in the chat as well. So one of the last things that you finished up on is this idea of talking to your advisor about this, and that it's important to talk to your advisors and so on. And this is something that students are wary of doing. Mm-hmm. I've heard students wary of doing it during the application process, or because they're afraid they might not be taken as seriously. Then they get into the first year of their PhD and imposter syndrome, and not thinking that's the good time to bring it up. And just wondering from your standpoint about timing and how to bring this up and what to do with a situation where you feel like an advisor is negative about it, or that you feel like it's forbidden to speak about.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the broader cultural issue, I think, in our discipline, that is really the issue. But honestly, I think so in my case, I worked in industry before going into academia. So for me personally, I think my work in industry has immensely contributed to my academic work. So that's actually one of the reasons that I actually asked people early on what they want to do with their PhD, and that helps me sort of figure out what their goals for the degree and for their career. Of course, nothing is set in stone. Might be. So I mean, I don't know if you have that opportunity to have that kind of a conversation. I would probably suggest doing that probably after you've been selected to a program. Unless a program is really well known for really placing people in these kinds of prestigious organizations like the UN or the CDC I mentioned, and so on and so forth. I will say this though, that for example, at Purdue, there were a few alumni who were again at these well-placed positions, and I never heard anyone say anything badly necessarily about their work. So hopefully that culture is changing. And in Wayne State, similarly, again, we have several folks who are working in non-academic jobs as well. So, fingers crossed.
Got it. Thank you. Another question, I'm also going to paste it in the chat just so it's top of mind there. That's from one of our doctoral students, Bridget. There are a number of international students in our PhD program who are facing visa status considerations. And I know you've faced your own visa status considerations. So do you have any advice for international students seeking Alt-AC work after graduation, or any United States citizens who want to go do their Alt-AC work in another country?
Yeah. So the visa thing is obviously a situation where the larger organization like the Microsofts and the Twitters probably will have a better edge because they are more familiar with the process, and compared to say a local nonprofit or something like that. I would suggest get a good lawyer. Having sound legal advice to guide both you and your potential employer, especially if the employer is a nonprofit or a relatively small business, will be really, really helpful to talk you both through the process.
Good advice. Why do you think the communication discipline has lagged behind other disciplines in speaking about Alt-AC. That's the original question. And I'm going to ask, what is it that we can do to rectify that? I know that both you and I and Marco are speaking at National Communication Association this year about this topic, but why have we lagged? What do we need to do to create some systematic structural change?
Well, what can we do is basically just more of the stuff that we're doing right now. So I think that would be really helpful, just to get the profile, I guess, of COM PhD students who are working in these amazing organizations that are not teaching or research related. I think in some ways we've been very more successful than some of the other social sciences and humanities fields, right? I mean, some of the humanistic fields, unfortunately, have been going through a long, protracted battle with placements. And communication itself, with enrollments, has been a growing field. So we just, in some ways, we just haven't had the need because the job market has been relatively healthy. Again, broadly speaking, I'm not speaking for specific subdisciplines, but overall, I think it's been relatively healthy. But of course, that might change now with the COVID situation, and plus, yeah. So I think that's part of the issue, at least with the social sciences and the humanistic fields. Interesting enough, I think, the engineering folks, most of their PhDs and their masters, they go straight to industry or they work into policy. So I think that would be a really interesting model to start looking at and seeing what they do, because there is really, I've never heard anyone disparage PhD engineering who is working for, a large company or even a small company or the government, as opposed to, being a researcher. So I think maybe looking at what the engineering folks are doing might be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of connected to that question. And Rahul, while you are responding to this question, I'd like you to think not only of students as your audience, but also faculty members who have joined this and are trying to figure out what it is that we need to do on our side. And I'm going to paste it in the chat as well, just so you see it. And the question from Bridget is, as far as you can imagine, what motivates departments to offer PhD programs in communication and accept more students than they could place in faculty positions? It seems like these issues with job availability are well known, but what could be preventing PhD programs from adopting away from research tracks or from churning out graduate students? And from a faculty standpoint, this is, I've been our doctoral director at Arizona State before, and I also am getting, increasingly concerned. As you said, it's not that we don't have a lot of jobs, because communication majors continue to blossom, but the tenure track jobs are decreasing, and then definitely over this last year. So what is it that we need to be thinking about structurally in terms of PhD programs? I know it's a really easy question. I'm here late at night at your time.
So I don't think there's a huge conspiracy or anything like that. There obviously is a structural mismatch or imbalance in some disciplines. I'm not entirely certain that we have the imbalance, the structural imbalance in the communication discipline, though, maybe prior to COVID. So I think that's going to be something interesting to watch out for. I think this with the numbers from last year and then this year to see what pops out. I do know that a few communication departments did make the decision not to admit new students for the fall semester because they really wanted to prioritize their existing, the funding commitments to their existing PhD students. And other universities, Wayne State, for instance, have safeguarded, I think, funding requirements for existing PhD students, and maybe offered admittance to PhD students and said, well, we're still working on securing the funding part, so stay tuned. Those are really awful, stressful situations to be in. We were all PhD students, and I think especially for international students, there's just too much uncertainty about that. So honestly, my advice to anyone applying for any PhD program is do not go if they don't give you funding for the year, because it's not worth it. But I don't know if that is, I mean, you can't really force someone to change their mind. If they're driven and they're really excited about it, they'll go for it. So, I mean, that's just my take, but I would not tell people to apply for PhD programs where they're not getting funded.
Yeah, well, I've definitely, in connection to your question of to students, like, why are you pursuing a PhD?
Mm-hmm.
Over the last couple of years, and especially this year when I was speaking with students in terms of recruitment, I really was a lot more frank about what the job outlook was, and just because I'm feeling increasingly an ethical pull toward that sort of having those conversations early, rather than having a doctoral student in the prime of their life. Most of them are coming, when they could be doing lots of other awesome things in their life, investing so much time and energy, and then finding out, oh gosh, wow, statistically speaking, I probably won't get a tenure track job. And even right now, saying that out loud, I had to change from may not to probably not. So statistically speaking, probably not. And I think that for those of us who are tenure track professors, and both you and I are, it's a hard pill to swallow, and it sometimes can be a difficult conversation to have. And so I'm still navigating it. And so I appreciate you sharing the way that you've navigated it yourself, and the kind of questions and so on you're asking students. So.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. We have reached that time in our presentation where it's time to share some love for Dr. Mitra in the chat box or through your icons. And then if there's anything in particular that impacted you or that you took away from this presentation, we're always very curious about those things, because sometimes the things that we didn't realize were going to be important ended up being important. And definitely feel free to copy paste that chat. There's a lot of good resources that, and I really want to say thank you to all of the participants as well. There's, we have a Slack channel, we have websites for where to learn methods, how to get alternative AC jobs. I also shared, Rahul is one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter, so definitely take a look there as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Marco, who's going to do a little bit of a wrap up. And as I turn it over, I'm just going to give Dr. Mitra a big clap.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tracy. Thank you so much, Dr. Mitra, here as well. And thank you so much to our first speaker, Dr. Nicole Martin, here earlier today. This has been an amazing speaker series. I have learned so much, and I've seen that there's a huge demand from the audience and from your all's participation here. I love the energy in the chat box. I love the energy that has taken place here in many different ways as well. So I will hope that this conversation and these conversations will continue beyond this confinement of this virtual webinar series and workshop series. I am dropping a link to an evaluation form in the chat box right now. You will also get access to that link via an automated email within the next few days. There are a few questions there, and we will make sure to take those back to NCA to kind of peer pressure them into offering more programming on alternative and adjacent academic careers here, because from what I'm seeing here as a doctoral student is that people want to learn more about that, and there is such a need to hear more about these things here. So thanks once again for our two speakers today, Dr. Rahul Mitra and Dr. Nicole Martin here. Thank you to our other 4 speakers over the last week as well. Thank you to the ASU doctoral students who have supported us here, who have introduced our speakers. And thank you to you specifically, our audience. Without an audience, this speaker series wouldn't be a speaker series. It would just be speakers. So thank you everyone for showing up. Feel free to remain in touch with the Transformation Project at Arizona State, and look out for those automated emails via Eventbrite. Have a good night, everyone, from wherever you are joining us. Goodbye.
Bye. And students in my doctoral class, as well as the 2 speakers, we will reconvene at the top of the hour for a short discussion. For the rest of you, we'll see you soon. Oh, and the recordings, by the way, are going to be on the NCA website, if all goes as planned, sometime this summer. We will announce when those are available via an email to you.